U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner have been meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel this morning. The fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas came under serious threat over the weekend, with Israeli forces launching strikes over Gaza after it says Hamas militants killed 2 IDF soldiers. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Debora Patta brings us up to speed on the situation from Jerusalem.
The skies over Gaza are quiet this morning after the ceasefire faced its gravest test yet, with Hamas and Israel accusing each other of violations. Both sides have now recommitted to the peace process, but over the weekend, war was back in Gaza. 45 Palestinians were killed, said local health officials, and 2 soldiers, say the IDF, as mediators race to get the ceasefire back on track. President Trump has insisted it was still in place and it would be handled toughly but properly, adding he didn't believe Hamas leadership was involved, but rather rebel groups. For Palestinian families that had come out to enjoy a quiet moment at a seaside cafe, their peace was shattered by an Israeli strike there, and the blood-soaked scenes they thought were a thing of the past had returned. Hospitals filled up once again with nearly 100 injured from multiple Israeli strikes. The IDF said they were thwarting ceasefire violations by Hamas and provided this footage they say shows armed Hamas fighters moving towards Israeli troops. But in central Gaza, it was a media center that was bombed, killing a cameraman and an engineer and injuring 3 others. More than 220 media workers have been killed in Gaza, according to Reporters Without Borders, over the past 2 years. And over the weekend, an Israeli security official had said aid would be halted, but today we're hearing that will not be the case, and I imagine that will be a key issue as top U.S. negotiators try to keep the peace process on track. Debora Patta, CBS News, East Jerusalem.
Well, before Witkoff and Kushner traveled to Israel, the pair sat down with 60 Minutes correspondent Lesley Stahl about their message to Israel moving forward and its leader, Benjamin Netanyahu. Listen to this.
I don't feel that way. And I thought he steered his country through some really difficult circumstances.
People think that he prolonged the incarceration of the hostages for his own political future.
I don't think that's the case.
The biggest message that we've tried to convey to the Israeli leadership now is that now that the war is over, if you want to integrate Israel with the broader Middle East, you have to find a way to help the Palestinian people thrive and do better.
How are you doing with that message?
We're just getting started.
And you can stream much more of Lesley's interview with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner by looking for 60 Minutes on the CBS News app or on Paramount+. For more on the situation in the Middle East, I want to bring in Aaron David Miller. He is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Aaron, always good to have you at CBS News. Before we jump into the violence that we saw in Gaza over the weekend, let's just sort of unpack what Witkoff and Kushner had to say to 60 Minutes yesterday. It's always been of the mindset, I think, of a lot of people here that to better the lives of the Palestinians, that the Arab states have to do more. Is that somehow in the cards? It's been difficult because they don't want to see refugees streaming across into their borders because of some of the issues that the Israelis have faced with Hamas. And yet there is an understanding that for them to be able to have some kind of agency, they need the support of some of those states. Is that possible?
Look, Aaron, thanks for having us. Arab state involvement in this is going to be critical. But the sine qua non for trying to create what Jared Kushner referred to, let's use the term a conflict-ending agreement between Israelis and Palestinians. For that to happen, the primary decisions are going to have to be made by an Israeli government and by a Palestinian leadership that has to have a monopoly over the forces of violence within Palestinian society. One gun, one authority, one negotiating position. I was at the last effort, 25 years ago, when an American president brought a Palestinian leader, Chairman Yasser Arafat, and a very risk-ready Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Barak, to Camp David for 2 weeks, the only time you had such a summit in an effort to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We did not involve the Arab states to the degree that we should have. But my point, I guess, is after 2 weeks, the gaps on the core issues that needed to be resolved, border security, refugees, Jerusalem, end of all conflict and claims, were as wide as the Grand Canyon. And Vlad, today, those gaps are galactic in character. It's going to take heroic leadership, which you do not have in Israel, among Palestinians, and also give the president his due for creating a moment that could lead, with presidential focus and determination, to an end to the war in Gaza. But you're also going to need a degree of leadership in recent years that we have not seen in Washington.
Yeah, I recall those meetings and how the world sort of waited with bated breath, hoping that this was finally going to be an end to the conflict, the decades of conflict. And then, of course, Chairman Arafat walked away from that meeting. And then the next thing you knew, we had the second intifada. I do wonder if, to the point that you're making, if there are Israeli elections that will be held very soon. Benjamin Netanyahu is no Ehud Barak and vice versa. Could we see new leadership in Israel if Netanyahu loses that election that could perhaps get us to the point that you're suggesting?
I don't know, but with the shadow of October 7th looming large and dark, and it will for years, over Israeli society, and certainly given the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza and the exponential rise of Palestinian deaths and injuries, it will affect a generation of Palestinians. As far as the Israelis are concerned, I think what is clear is you're not talking about a left-of-center government. The days of Ehud Barak, Ehud Olmert, Rabin Peres, I think for now are gone. You're talking about a center-right government. If the government goes to term, October 2026, most Israeli pundits suggest that it probably won't. There's a reasonable chance, given Knesset arithmetic and the fact that Israel is a right-of-center country, again in the wake of October 7, that Benjamin Netanyahu, now the longest governing prime minister in the state of Israel, in the history of the state of Israel, presiding over the most extreme right-wing government in the history of the state of Israel, it's a reasonable chance that Benjamin Netanyahu could win again.
Aaron, before I let you go, so to that point, if, because of what we've seen happen over the weekend, with the hostages now back home with their families, other than those remains that the Israelis obviously and their families still want to get back, what would prevent Netanyahu? I mean, we've heard the president also echoing that if Hamas does not stop what it is doing, that the president will be in full support of Benjamin Netanyahu and Israelis going back into Gaza. What is to prevent him from, if it's at all possible, to imagine an unleashed Israeli or an unleashed IDF when the hostages are not in play?
I mean, it could happen. I'll take a flyer here to suggest that the war as we've known it over the last 2 years, a comprehensive military ops, deployment of thousands of Israeli ground forces, artillery strikes, air strikes, intelligence-driven Israeli raids in densely populated Palestinian areas. I think that phase, that kind of war, has come to an end for two reasons. I think Hamas, frankly, now understands that the hostages were, in the end, a liability, not an asset. Their freedom of maneuver in Gaza, politically, has increased substantially in the last week. And Donald Trump has made it unmistakably clear to Benjamin Netanyahu, and Netanyahu will not win another Israeli election without Trump's support, and not as a bystander, but as an active campaigner. Trump's more popular in Israel than the prime minister is. I think Donald Trump will go to great lengths, short of some massive Hamas provocation, to keep this process moving. Whether or not you can answer the questions that need to be answered to end the war in Gaza, Vlad, that's right now just a thought experiment.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about, as always. Aaron David Miller, always enjoy hearing from you and your analysis. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.